Hey, I'm Nathan. Before we get into this one, I want you to know something about the paperwork a soldier signs before he leaves. It's called a family care plan, and it is the single most boring document in the United States military. It's a form. It has boxes. It says who feeds your kid, who takes them to the dentist, who has the authority to sign a permission slip while you are somewhere you're not allowed to name. Nobody makes movies about it, and yet that form is the only wall standing between a child and whoever wants him. Today's story is about a man who filled that form out correctly, and about the people who figured out that a form is just paper, and paper can be replaced, and a small boy can be kept somewhere nobody thinks to look because the property already has a permit for keeping things in cages. It's about a phone call that lasted 19 seconds. It's about a father who did not scream, did not threaten, did not book an emergency flight home, because he understood something most people never learn. Rage is a flare. It's bright, it's loud, it lasts 4 seconds, and then you're standing in the dark holding a hot tube. Paper is a fire. Paper spreads. Stay with me, because 40 hours after that 19-second phone call, a man who had never once been afraid of anything was leaving a voicemail he could not finish. Grant Ivey learned animals before he learned people, and he would tell you that was probably the whole problem with him. He grew up 9 miles outside Bel Harrow, Tennessee, in a valley where the fog sat on the pasture until 10 in the morning and the road washed out twice a year. His father, Del Ivey, was a farrier, which meant Grant spent his childhood standing at the shoulder of horses that outweighed him by 1,200 pounds while his father rasped a hoof flat. You learn things in that position. You learn that an animal tells you what it's going to do about 4 seconds before it does it. You learn that the flinch happens in the skin over the ribs first. You learn that if you get loud, you have already lost, because the loudest thing in the barn is never the thing in charge. Grant was 31 before he understood that people worked the same way. He enlisted at 19, and by 23 he was a dog handler, and by 29 he was a kennel master, and by 38 he was a chief warrant officer, which in the Army means you have stopped being promoted for leadership and started being promoted for knowing one thing so completely that nobody can lie to you about it. Grant's one thing was working dogs. Detection dogs, specifically. The kind that walk a shipping container line and sit down in front of exactly 1 crate out of 400 and are never ever wrong. And the kind of program where the paperwork behind each dog is thicker than the dog. He could read a kennel the way an accountant reads a ledger. Feed weights, stool logs, run cards, water intake, the little laminated tags that hang on a gate. He used to tell his students that a kennel cannot lie, because a kennel is a machine for producing records, and a liar always forgets that the drain has an opinion. He met Marley Crowder at a livestock auction in Curran County when he was 33 and home on leave, and he married her 14 months later in a church with a sagging porch, and for a while it was the best thing that ever happened to either of them. Marley was the one Crowder who had gotten out. That's how she put it, and she said it like a joke, and it was never a joke. Her father, Elwood Crowder, owned Crowder Kennels and Canine Services, which sounds like a business, and was actually a small kingdom. 61 runs on 11 acres off the Bel Harrow Highway. A boarding operation, a grooming operation, a training arm that put on obedience classes in the church parking lot on Tuesdays. And, most importantly, the Curran County Animal Services contract. The county paid Crowder Kennels to take every stray, every surrender, every court-ordered seizure in a 200-square-mile county, and paid them per animal, per day. Elwood had held that contract for 26 years. 3 county mayors had come and gone. The contract had not. Marley's brothers stayed. Bo, the middle one, ran the kennel floor. Denton, the oldest, handled what the family called county relations, which meant he sat on the fair board and the volunteer fire board and bought a lot of raffle tickets. Their mother, Loretta, did the books at a card table in the front office and had never in her life spoken above a conversational tone. Marley left at 22 with a duffel bag and never really explained why, and Grant, who did not push people, did not push. He got exactly 1 piece of it, once, about 2 years into the marriage, at 3 in the morning, when she couldn't sleep. She said, "When I was 9, I had a dog named Biscuit, and I loved that dog. And Bo put Biscuit in the far run for 3 weeks because I sassed Daddy at supper. And every day I could hear her. And every day at supper, Bo would ask me, real polite, if I'd learned anything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That's how they do it, Grant. They don't hit you. They put something you love in a box, and they let you listen." Grant said, "Where's Bo now?" And Marley said, "Asleep in a house his daddy paid for, and he sleeps just fine," and rolled over, and that was the end of it for 11 years. Ezra was born in a February ice storm. He came out furious and stayed that way for about 8 months, and then turned, all at once, into the most watchful child Grant had ever been around. A kid who noticed. Grant would come home from a deployment, and Ezra, 4 years old, would look at his father's boots and say, "Those are the sand ones," and be right. Grant taught him the kennel game the way his own father had taught him horses, which is to say, without ever calling it a lesson. It started as a way to keep a toddler occupied at the training facility on Saturdays. Count, mark, hold. Count the thing you see. Mark it in your head with something you can't forget. A rhyme, a color, a knuckle on your hand. Hold it until somebody asks. Ezra could tell you how many trucks had come down the access road on a Saturday in April 3 weeks after the fact, and he could tell you the color of the second one, and Grant thought it was a party trick. Marley died on a Tuesday in September, 14 months before any of this started, on Route 9 outside Bel Harrow, when a gravel hauler ran the light at the county road. There was nothing complicated about it. There was no mystery. She was 41, and she was on her way to pick up dog food, of all the stupid things, and a man who had been awake for 19 hours killed her in about a second and a half. The hauling company settled without ever letting it get near a courtroom. $410,000, structured, in trust, for Ezra Ivey, minor, to be administered by his legal guardian and released in stages beginning at 18. Grant signed the paperwork in a lawyer's office in a golf shirt because he'd flown in from Fort Bliss that morning, and he did not read it carefully because he did not care about it. He remembers thinking that the number was obscene and small at the same time. Elwood Crowder came to the funeral in a black suit that fit him 20 pounds ago and shook Grant's hand with both of his own and said, "That boy's got family here, son. You remember that." Grant remembered it. He just didn't hear it right. Here is what Crowder Kennels and Canine Services actually was, underneath the sign. The county contract paid a per-animal, per-day rate, $11.40 a head at the time, which does not sound like much until you understand that Curran County's animal services intake for the fiscal year was billed at 9,480 animal days. That is roughly $108,000 of public money, and nobody on the county commission had ever once walked the runs and counted heads, because who does that? You look at the invoice. The invoice has a number. The number is the same as last year's number plus a little. You approve it and you go to lunch. Elwood Crowder had understood something in 1998 that most small-time operators never figure out. The fraud isn't in the money, it's in the counting. If the county pays you per animal per day, and the county never counts your animals, then your animals are whatever you say they are. Crowder Kennels had, on any given night, somewhere between 30 and 40 dogs on the property. It billed the county for an average of 26 animal days a day, every day, year-round, on top of the real ones. And then there was the other line. A boarding kennel with a county contract is a river with a lot of water in it and no one watching the bank. Dogs came in as strays. Some got claimed, some got adopted, and some, the ones nobody came for, the ones with no chip, the older ones, the mixed ones, the ones a family surrendered at the counter with their eyes on the floor. Some of those got a line in the book that said adopted out, and a date, and nothing else. No name, no address, no adoption fee receipt, because the receipt book conveniently only had carbons for the ones that got fees. Those dogs went to a man named Merle Bassinger, who operated out of a property line in 3 states and held a federal Class B dealer license that had been suspended twice, and who moved animals to Research Supply, to unlicensed breeders, and to 2 or 3 places that did not put anything on paper at all. Bassinger paid cash by the head. He came at night. He liked Thursdays. Bo Crowder ran the floor. Bo was 39, thick through the chest, and had the particular easy charm of a man who has never once in his life been told no by anyone whose opinion mattered to him. He could talk to a woman at the feed store for 10 minutes, and she'd come away thinking he was the nicest fella in Curran County. He coached a rec league. He had, briefly, been in a police K-9 program 2 counties over, and had washed out of it in his 2nd year, and the reason was in a file that had been sealed as a personnel matter. A decoy had reported that Beau kept a Malinois in a crate in the back of a truck in August with the windows up, for 4 hours, as correction. There had been no charges. There had been a resignation. What Beau understood, and he understood it in his bones, without ever having a word for it, was the same thing his father understood about the county. If a system never checks, the system's numbers are just your voice written down. And if a person can't be heard, the person's suffering is not an event. It's weather. Marley had said it exactly right at 3 in the morning. They didn't hit you. They put something in a box and let you listen. Grant's orders came down in July, 13 months after Marley died. He wasn't allowed to say where. It was a rotation attached to a joint task element, 180 days, and the entire thing lived behind a classification he could not explain to a 7-year-old or to a county judge. He could say the word overseas. That was about it. The mission wasn't dramatic. He would spend 180 days building a detection program for a partner force, standing in the sun teaching men through an interpreter how to read a dog's change of behavior. It was the least secret agent thing imaginable, and it was locked down completely. And that combination is exactly what the Crowders needed and could never have designed on purpose. He did the paperwork right. That's the part that matters. He did all of it right. The family care plan named his sister, Bonnie Ivey, 38, a surgical scrub tech at the regional hospital in Marston, who lived 20 minutes from the farm and had kept Ezra 100 times. He executed a special power of attorney at the legal assistance office on post, notarized, naming Bonnie for medical, educational, and financial decisions. He set up an allotment. He filed the school forms. He walked Ezra through the calendar on the refrigerator. 180 magnets, and every Sunday you take one off and put it in the coffee can, and when the can's full, I'm at the door. The night before he flew, he sat on the end of Ezra's bed and did what he always did, which was give the boy a job, because Grant had never once in his life comforted anyone by telling them everything would be fine. He said, "You're on count while I'm gone." Ezra said, "Count what?" "Everything. Same as always. Count it, mark it, hold it. And when I get back, you tell me what I missed." "That's not a real job." "It's the only job," Grant said. "Everybody's got a mouth. Almost nobody's got a count." He flew on a Tuesday. He was 3 weeks in country before anything went wrong. And when it went wrong in a way he could not have imagined. Because Grant Ivey's imagination had been trained on ambushes and IEDs and border crossings, and the thing that came for his son came with a notary stamp. It started with Bonnie, which was the smart part. On the 4th of August, at 9:15 at night, Bonnie Ivey was pulled over on Route 9, 4 miles from her house, by a Curran County deputy who said her plate light was out. It wasn't. She blew a 0.00. The deputy then reported that he smelled marijuana, searched the car, and recovered a sandwich bag containing 41 hydrocodone tablets from the map pocket of the passenger door. Bonnie Ivey was a surgical scrub tech. 41 diverted hydrocodone tablets in the car of a woman with access to an operating theater is not a possession charge. It is a career-ending, license-revoking, front page of the Curran County Ledger charge, and it landed on her exactly that way. She was booked at 11:40 p.m. Her employer suspended her the next morning pending investigation. The state board opened a file. Her attorney told her, correctly, that this would take 8 to 14 months to resolve. And on the 6th of August, the Curran County Department of Children's Services received a call from Bonnie's own neighbor, or so the intake note said, expressing concern about a 7-year-old boy in the care of a woman who had just been arrested for narcotics diversion, whose father was deployed and unreachable. That is how you take a child, not with a van, with a phone call and a plate light. Loretta Crowder walked into the DCS office in Bel Harrow at 8:50 on the morning of the 7th with a manila folder. Inside it was a family care plan naming Beau Crowder, maternal uncle, as caregiver, and a special power of attorney granting Beau Crowder authority over the educational, medical, and financial affairs of Ezra Ivey, minor. Both documents bore Grant Ivey's signature. Both were notarized by Charlene Dupree, a notary public who worked 3 days a week at the Bell Harrow branch of Curran Farmers Bank, and who had, for 11 years, done the Crowder family's stamping for free. The signature was real. That was the elegant part. Grant had signed 9 copies of a special power of attorney at the legal office on post. The clerk had said, "Sign here, and I'll need 3 more of these." And one of those signature pages had gone home with him in a folder and had sat in a drawer in the farmhouse for a month, and a page is just a page until you staple something else in front of it. The DCS caseworker, who was carrying 41 open cases and had been on the job for 5 months, looked at a notarized federal-looking document, a grandmother in a cardigan, and an uncle in a clean shirt, who said, "He can have the room over the office, ma'am. We've already got the bed in it." And she made the decision that 99 caseworkers out of 100 would make with that folder in front of them. Ezra Ivey was placed with his maternal uncle on the 7th of August. His father found out on the 11th, in a 9-second email from Bonnie that said, "Bo has him. I am sorry, I will fix this." And then nothing, because Bonnie's attorney told her, again, correctly, that a woman facing a felony diversion charge should not be sending emails about a custody dispute to anyone. Grant read that email at 0430 local, standing outside a tent in a country he could not name, and the thing he felt was not what you'd expect. It was a kind of terrible clarity. He said later that it was like the moment a dog's ears go flat, and you absolutely know, that in 4 seconds something is going to happen, and you have 4 seconds to decide what. He did not have 4 seconds. He had, it turned out, 22 days. The room over the office lasted 6 days. It was a real room. That was the thing Bo kept saying afterward, to anyone who would listen, in the tone of a man who genuinely believed he'd been misunderstood. There was a bed. There was a window. The bed had a quilt on it that Loretta had made in 1994. But the room over the office was in the front building, and the front building was where the county inspector came, and where the boarding customers came, and where the DCS caseworker came for her 30-day check. And Bo Crowder had an operation running out of the back of that property that involved cash, a Thursday truck, and a book with a column in it that nobody outside the family was ever supposed to read. Ezra Ivey was 7 years old and had been raised by a man who counted things. On the 3rd night, he came down the office stairs at 11 at night because he couldn't sleep, and he stood at the window in the dark, and he watched 2 men load 6 dogs into a stock trailer with the dome light taped over. He counted 6. He marked it. 6 like the 6 sides on Daddy's compass. He held it. On the 5th night, he did it again. 8 dogs. He marked it. 8 like a snowman. On the 6th morning at breakfast, he asked his uncle where the dogs went. Bo Crowder put his coffee down and looked at his nephew for a long moment, and what he saw was not a child. What he saw was a witness with his father's flat gray eyes, sitting at his kitchen table, eating his cereal, 3 weeks into a 180-day window in which nobody with any authority to care was going to be within 7,000 miles. He said, "You know what, bud? I bet you'd love it out back. Real dog man sleeps with his dogs." The run was number 58, at the end of the north row, and it was 8 feet long and 4 feet wide with a concrete floor and a chain-link gate and a corrugated roof, and it had an insulated plastic doghouse in it, the kind with the flap door. And in the 2nd week of August in Tennessee, it was 91 degrees at 9 at night. Bo did not lock the gate. He wanted everybody to know that later, and he said it in the interview, twice. "I never locked that gate." And it was true. He did not need to. He said, on the first night, in a voice that was almost kind, "You go on back in the house anytime you want, bud. Anytime. But if you do, I'll know you can't handle it. And I'll call that lady and tell her you're too much for us. And they'll put you in a home with strangers till your daddy's done. And I hear those places is rough on little fellas." That is the entire architecture of it. There was no lock. There was a 7-year-old and a sentence. He slept in run 58 for 19 nights. There were dogs on either side of him, which was the only mercy in the whole thing, and one of them was an 11-year-old shepherd mix with a bad hip who had come in as a stray in June and had never been claimed, and Ezra named him Sergeant because his father had told him once that sergeants are the ones who actually run everything. Ezra pulled the doghouse right up against the chain link between his run and Sergeant's, and slept with his back to the wire, and the dog slept with his back to the wire on the other side, and that is how a 7-year-old got through 19 August nights in Curran County, Tennessee, 40 feet from a house with air conditioning in it. He was not starved. Loretta brought him supper on a paper plate. He was not beaten. That, Grant would say later, in the only interview he ever gave, is what people get wrong about this kind of thing. Everybody's looking for a monster with a belt, he said. The efficient ones don't need a belt. They just need a system that doesn't count. They pulled him out of school on the 11th of August. Loretta filed an intent to homeschool letter with the Curran County Department of Education, which in Tennessee is a form, and the form was accepted, and that closed the last door in the county through which an adult was scheduled to look at Ezra Ivey's face on a regular basis. And there was one more thing, which nobody in the family ever said out loud in front of the boy, and which Loretta Crowder wrote down anyway, because she was a bookkeeper, and bookkeepers write things down. On the 14th of August, Loretta Crowder called the trust administrator for the Ezra Ivey settlement in Nashville and asked, in her low, pleasant voice, what documentation would be required for a change of guardian of record, and what the annual disbursement schedule looked like for the maintenance and support of the minor, and whether those disbursements went to the guardian directly. $410,000, structured, with a maintenance and support provision that permitted the legal guardian to draw against it, annually, with receipts, for the child's housing, food, education, and medical care. They did not put Ezra in a kennel because they were sadists, although Bo was one. They put Ezra in a kennel because a child in a house generates questions, playdates, doctors, school pictures, a neighbor waving. A child on a licensed animal facility with an 11-acre setback and a gravel drive and a no trespassing sign generates nothing at all. Bo said it best, on a recording he did not know existed. He ain't in the way out here. He was a line item they had to store for 180 days. Piper Crowder was 16 and had lived her whole life in that family, which meant she had spent 16 years learning exactly how much you can see without being seen looking. She was Denton's daughter. She worked weekends in the grooming shed for $8 an hour, paid in cash by her grandmother, and she had, since she was about 11, understood that the men in her family were not the men in her family's stories about themselves. She had never done anything about it. There was nothing to do about it. You do not report your grandfather to a sheriff who eats Sunday dinner at your grandfather's table. On the 9th night, she came out at 11:30 with a plastic tub of leftover pot roast and a flashlight with a red lens on it, and she sat down cross-legged on the concrete outside Run 58, and she said, "Hey, you awake?" And Ezra Ivey, who had not spoken more than 9 words a day for a week, said, 6 on Thursday, 8 on Saturday, 6 last night. Piper said, "What?" "Trucks," he said. "Dogs, going out. I'm on count." She sat there for a long time in the dark. Then she said, "Who told you to count?" "My dad." "Where's your dad?" "I'm not allowed to know," Ezra said, "and neither are you." Piper Crowder came out every night after that, and around the 4th night, she started counting too. The call came on the 28th of August at 6:52 in the morning, Bell Harrow time. Every Saturday, Loretta let Ezra call his Aunt Bonnie for 4 minutes on the office phone, because DCS had put it in the placement plan, and Loretta Crowder was, above all, a woman who kept her paperwork clean. She sat in the front office with the door open, and she listened to every word, and the calls were, "I'm fine." "Yes, ma'am, I'm fine. Okay, bye." On the 28th, the office phone rang 3 minutes before the call was supposed to go out, and it was the feed supplier in Marston with a delivery problem, and Loretta stepped into the back hall with the cordless. Ezra Ivey picked up the desk phone and dialed a number he had known by heart since he was 5, a number that rang in a duty office 7,000 miles away and got routed twice, and a staff sergeant with a Rhode Island accent answered and said the words, "Morale line," and Ezra said, "I need Chief Ivey. I'm his son. It's an emergency." Grant Ivey was on the pad at 3:52 in the afternoon local, in body armor, waiting on a bird, when a specialist ran across the gravel with a handset and the words on his face. The recording of that call is 19 seconds long. It was played at trial. There is a transcript in the federal record, and it is the single hardest piece of paper in the entire case. And it reads like this: Dad, I'm here. Dad, Mom's brother made me sleep in the dog kennel again. He says you signed me over. There is a pause on the recording of 2.5 seconds. Everyone who has heard it says the same thing about that pause, which is that you can hear the helicopter. Then Grant Ivey said 2 words: stay quiet. And Ezra Ivey, 7 years old, standing on a chair in a kennel office in Curran County, Tennessee, with a woman's footsteps coming back up the hall, said, "Yes, sir," and hung up the phone, and got down off the chair, and went back out to run 58. Here is what those 2 words meant, and it is the thing the prosecution had to explain to a jury for 40 minutes, because it sounds, out of context, like a father telling his son to shut up and take it. Grant Ivey had been teaching that boy for 3 years that a count is worthless if the other side knows you're counting. He had said it 100 times over 100 Saturdays. Don't tell them what you see, tell me. In the language of that house, between that man and that child, stay quiet did not mean endure. It meant, you are still on the job, do not let them see the job, and I am coming. Ezra understood it perfectly. He was the only person in the world who could have. Grant handed the handset back to the specialist. He did not sit down. He did not put his fist through anything. Men who were there said his face did not change at all, and one of them, a sergeant first class who had known him for 6 years, said the thing that ended up in a magazine profile 2 years later. I've seen that man's face when a dog alerts on a car. That's the face he had. That's not rage. That's work starting. He walked to the operations tent. He looked at the clock on the wall, which was set to Zulu, and he did the arithmetic that a man does when the only asset he has is time and other people. It was 1552 local. He had a satellite line, a chain of command that owed him nothing and would give him everything, and one phone call he could make that would actually matter. And here is where the story turns, because of what he did not do. He did not call the Curran County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Buddy Lattimore had been to 4 Crowder family weddings and had a K9 unit whose 2 dogs had been donated and trained by Crowder Kennels, an arrangement worth about $19,000 a year that had never been put out to bid. He did not call DCS. DCS had a folder with his own notarized signature in it, saying the boy was exactly where he belonged. He did not call a lawyer first, and he did not call the news, and he did not call his sister, who was under indictment and whose phone was, for all he knew, the least private object in Tennessee. Grant Ivey called a man named Reuben Sandoval, who at 6:15 in the morning in Kansas City was standing in his kitchen in a bathrobe, and who had not spoken to Grant in 3 years, and who owed him something that had nothing to do with friendship. Reuben Sandoval had been a Marine dog handler and then a civilian, and for the last 9 years he had been a special agent with the Office of Inspector General at the United States Department of Agriculture, which is, to the surprise of almost everyone who hears it, the federal agency with criminal jurisdiction over the Animal Welfare Act, over licensed dealers, and over the interstate transport of animals under falsified health certificates. 6 years earlier, Sandoval had built a case against a Class B dealer in Missouri and watched it die in a U.S. attorney's office because he could not prove the dogs in the trailer had ever been in the seller's kennel. Grant Ivey, then a kennel master at a training detachment 300 miles away, had spent 2 days of his own leave teaching a federal agent how to read a run card, a feed ledger, and a bag of drain sediment, and the case had gone to trial, and the man had gone to prison for 4 years. At 6:15 in the morning, Sandoval picked up a call from a number with no country code and heard a voice he recognized instantly say, "Reuben, it's Grant Ivey. I need 11 minutes, and I need you to not ask me the obvious question until I'm done." Sandoval put his coffee down. Grant did not say, "My son is in a dog run, come get him." He knew exactly what would happen if a federal agent in Kansas City called a Tennessee sheriff about a welfare check. The boy would be moved. The book would be burned. The Thursday truck would not come. What he said was this: "There's a kennel in Curran County, Tennessee, Crowder Kennels and K9 Services. They hold the county animal control contract. I want you to pull 3 things before you do anything else: their federal license file, their county invoices for the last 3 fiscal years, and every health certificate written for animals leaving that address. Sandoval said, "Grant, why?" "Because," Grant said, "my son is in run 58 and has been for 19 nights. And if I call it in as a child in a cage, one deputy shows up, one gate gets opened, one boy gets a hug and a ride to a foster placement, and every single one of them walks. And in 6 months my sister's still charged, my name's still on a forged power of attorney, and that family still owns that county." "Grant, but if you call it in as a licensed facility," Grant said, "you don't need permission. You need a number that doesn't match." There was a long silence on a satellite line with a half-second lag in it. Then Reuben Sandoval said, "How many dogs do they say they have?" And Grant Ivey said, "That's the whole case. Go find out." It was 16:03 local. In Tennessee, it was 7:03 in the morning. The clock that Grant started in his head at that moment ran for 40 hours and 11 minutes. Hour 4. Reuben Sandoval was at his desk with 3 browser windows open and a licensing database that most people do not know exists. The federal license file for Crowder Kennels came up in 90 seconds, and the first thing on it was a problem. The Class B dealer license, number 43-0219, held by Elwood Crowder, had lapsed, not been revoked, lapsed. The annual fee hadn't been paid in 22 months, which meant that every single animal that had crossed a state line out of that address in the last 22 months, sold or traded or given, had moved under a dead license. That is not a fine. That is a federal offense with a per-animal count. The second thing was the inspection history, and it was beautiful in the way that only a really old lie is beautiful. Crowder Kennels had been inspected 11 times in 6 years and had a nearly clean record, and every one of those inspections listed an animal inventory in the low 30s. Meanwhile, the county invoices, which Sandoval got by 10:40 that morning by the exotic investigative technique of calling the Curran County Finance Office and saying he was a member of the public requesting records under the State Open Records Act, showed billing for an average of 59 animals a day. 31 on the inspection, 59 on the invoice, every single day, for years. "They can't both be true," Sandoval said out loud, to nobody, in an empty office at 10:41 in the morning. Hour 9. Sandoval had the third thing, and the third thing was the one that turned an administrative mess into a federal case with a hammer on the end of it. Interstate health certificates. Every dog that crosses a state line commercially needs one, signed by an accredited veterinarian. Sandoval pulled the certificates written at the Crowder address for the previous 14 months from the state animal health database, and there were 211 of them, and all 211 were signed by the same veterinarian, and that veterinarian had retired to Florida in the spring of the previous year and had not been in the state of Tennessee since. 211 forged federal documents. That is a count you can charge. He called Grant at hour 10 on a line that took 4 minutes to connect, and he said, "It's a real case. It was always a real case. Somebody just had to look." And Grant said, "Now the part I actually called you for. Who inspects them?" Hour 13. The USDA field inspector for that district was a woman named Marla Quintero, and Marla Quintero had, for 2.5 years, been writing the truth in a notebook that she had never shown to a single human being. She was not corrupt. She was a 56-year-old federal employee covering 41 facilities across 200 miles who had walked into Crowder Kennels 11 times and been walked through it by Bo Crowder, who was charming, who had coffee ready, who took her down the South Row every single time, and who had, on 2 occasions, mentioned in a friendly way that his brother sat on the county fair board with her husband's boss. She had written in her own notebook, in June, 2 years ago, "North Row not shown again. Asked twice. Count doesn't work." She had not filed it, because count doesn't work is not a finding, and a finding that doesn't hold up gets you a meeting with your supervisor and a nice man's lawyer calling your office. Sandoval called her at 8:15 at night and told her about the lapsed license and the invoices and the dead veterinarian, and Marla Quintero was quiet for 11 full seconds, and then she said, in a voice that a court reporter would later transcribe from a recorded interview, "I have been waiting 2.5 years for somebody to call me about that North Row." Hour 19. Grant Ivey, 7,000 miles away, at 3 in the morning local, sat in a plywood-walled room with a satellite line and did the thing he was actually good at, which was not fighting. He built the affidavit. Not legally. Sandoval and an assistant U.S. attorney named Dove Kirkbride did that part. What Grant did was tell a federal agent, over 4 hours, exactly what would be on that property and exactly where, in the specific dialect of a man who has run kennels for 20 years. He said, "The run cards will be on the gates, and they will be laminated, and they will be in Bo's handwriting, and they will not match the book in the office, because the book in the office is for the county, and the cards are for the man who has to actually feed them." He said, "There will be a feed ledger, and there is no version of this where the feed ledger matches 59 dogs, because feed costs real money, and nobody buys ghost kibble." He said, "Check the drain. A 61-run facility that actually holds 59 animals produces a specific amount of waste and a specific amount of sediment, and the county's sewer authority meters that property, and those meter readings are a public record, and they will show you a 30-dog kennel." He said, "There will be a camera system. Bo put it in 4 years ago because somebody stole a leaf blower. It is a cheap 8-channel DVR, and it will be in the office closet, and it will overwrite on a 30-day loop. And today is day 19. And then Grant Ivey said, the only sentence he said in 40 hours that had any heat in it at all. "Ruben, the DVR. That's the one. Everything else is money. That one's my son." Hour 24. Assistant U.S. Attorney Dove Kirkbride, 44, a man who had spent 6 years prosecuting agricultural fraud and had never once had a case walk into his office assembled, read a draft affidavit at his kitchen table at 11 at night and said the word "okay" out loud to an empty kitchen. There was a problem, and everyone saw it at the same time. A federal search warrant for a licensed animal facility gets you the runs, the books, the office, the computers. It does not get you a child, because a child is not evidence, and no federal magistrate in the country is going to sign a warrant based on a 19-second phone call from a 7-year-old relayed by a deployed soldier who cannot appear. The child had to be handled by the state, and the state, in Curran County, was Sheriff Buddy Lattimore. Hour 27. This is where Grant Ivey stopped being a father on a phone and became the most dangerous thing in the story, which is a patient man with a map of other people's obligations. He gave Sandoval 3 names, in order, and he had clearly been holding them since hour 1. The first was Yolanda Pruitt, a family law attorney in Marston who had represented Bonnie Ivey for 11 minutes before Bonnie ran out of money, and who, Grant knew this because he had read her firm's website at 3 in the morning at hour 6, had spent 9 years as a guardian ad litem for the juvenile court in a neighboring judicial district. Not Curran, neighboring, which meant she could file an emergency petition in front of a judge with no Sunday dinner obligations at all. The second was Dr. Francis Adeyemi, a child abuse pediatrician at the Regional Medical Center in Marston, whose entire professional existence is the documentation of what a body looks like after 19 nights of something. Grant's instruction was precise, and it was the instruction of a man who understood evidence. Don't take him to an emergency room. Take him to her. An ER writes, "no acute distress," and sends you home. She writes a report that's admissible. The third was Loretta. "Loretta Crowder keeps the books," Grant said. "She's the only one in that family who writes anything down. Bo's got a mouth. Elwood's got a handshake. Denton's got a fair board seat. Loretta's got a ledger and 11 years of notary stamps and a call log with a trust administrator in Nashville on it. She's 71 years old, and she has never been arrested in her life, and she is going to be the first one who talks. Put her in a room by herself and start with the phone call she made on the 14th of August. Sandoval said, "How do you know about a phone call on the 14th of August?" And Grant Ivey said, "Because that's the day the school year would have started, and she had to file the homeschool letter to keep him out of it, and a bookkeeper does her errands in one trip." Hour 31. Piper Crowder had 306 photographs on a phone. She had started on the 13th night, sitting outside Run 58 with a red-lensed flashlight and a 7-year-old who kept counting trucks, and something in her had finally come loose. She went into the office at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday while her grandmother slept, and she photographed the book, the real book, The one in the drawer under the register with the column headed out and the initials MB beside 141 entries. She photographed the feed invoices. She photographed the stack of blank health certificates with a signature stamp sitting on top of them in a cigar box. She photographed the run cards on the north row, all 19 of them, and she photographed Run 58's card, which was laminated exactly like the others, and which had, in Bo Crowder's handwriting, in the space where a dog's name goes, the word boy. She did not know what to do with any of it. She was 16, so she did what a 16-year-old does, which is nothing, for 6 days, while it ate a hole in her. And then on the 29th of August, at 4:40 in the afternoon, a woman in a windbreaker with USDA OIG on the back of it was standing at the end of the Crowder driveway with a county deputy from a different county and a warrant, and Piper Crowder walked down that driveway with her phone in her hand and said, "You need to see the north row first, not the south. He always takes people down the south." Hour 38. Marla Quintero walked Run 58 with an inspection clipboard and a federal agent behind her and did not say anything for a long moment. The run was 8 feet by 4. There was an insulated plastic doghouse pulled up flush against the north wall of chain link. There was a plastic bin with 3 t-shirts and a pair of jeans in it. There was a Curran County Public Library card in a sandwich bag, taped to the inside of the doghouse roof, in the way that a child hides a thing he thinks somebody might take. There was a spiral notebook with 19 rows of tally marks in it, and beside each row a number, and beside each number a word. 6/compass, 8 snowman, 4 table legs. And in the run beside it there was an 11-year-old shepherd mix with a bad hip standing at the wire, looking at the humans, not barking. The boy was not there. That is the part that made Sandoval's stomach drop through the concrete. At 4:40 in the afternoon on the 29th of August, Run 58 was empty. Hour 39. Bo Crowder had taken his nephew to the Curran County Fairgrounds because it was the last Friday in August and the fair was on, and Bo Crowder had a booth there every year for the Kennel, and there is nothing on God's earth that looks more like a functioning family than a man in a clean shirt buying a 7-year-old a lemonade at a county fair at 6 in the evening. He had also taken him because Loretta had gotten a call at 3:15 that afternoon from a friend at the county finance office asking why a federal investigator from Kansas City had requested 3 years of animal services invoices, and Loretta Crowder, who had never once panicked in her life, had walked into the kennel office and said 4 words to her son, "Get the boy out." Hour 39 and 40 minutes. A Marston police officer and Yolanda Pruitt, holding a signed ex parte emergency custody order from a judge in the next judicial district over, walked up to a kennel booth at the Curran County Fair between the funnel cake trailer and the 4-H barn. Ezra Ivey was sitting on an overturned bucket behind the table, holding a paper cup of lemonade he had not drunk any of. Yolanda Pruitt crouched down in front of him and said, "Ezra, my name's Yolanda. Your dad sent me." And Ezra Ivey looked at her, 7 years old, 40 pounds, 19 nights in a concrete run, sitting at a county fair in front of 200 people who had walked past him all afternoon, and he did not cry, and he did not run to her. He said, "What's the count?" Because his father had told him, "Don't tell them what you see, tell me." And this woman was not his father. Yolanda Pruitt, who had done this job for 9 years and had thought she was past being surprised, later testified that she had to think for a second, and that what came out of her mouth was, "He said to tell you the job's done, and you can hold it out loud now." And that is when the boy started shaking. Bo Crowder was standing 11 feet away with a corn dog in his hand. He did not do anything, which is a thing about men like Bo Crowder that people never believe. He did not lunge, or shout, or grab the boy's arm. He stood in the middle of a county fair with 200 neighbors around him, and he watched a stranger walk his nephew away. And the only thing he said, and he said it in a normal, pleasant, confused voice, was, "Now hold on. Is there some kind of paperwork here?" Yes, there was. Hour 40. The Crowder property. Reuben Sandoval opened a closet in the front office of Crowder Kennels and Canine Services and found a dust-covered 8-channel digital video recorder with 4 cameras still active, one of which was mounted on the corner of the feed shed and pointed, for the purpose of preventing the theft of a leaf blower directly down the North Row. 30-day loop, 19 nights on it. Sandoval sat down on an office chair at 7:20 in the evening and scrubbed to 11:41 p.m. on the 22nd of August and watched a 7-year-old boy in a t-shirt drag a plastic doghouse 4 feet across concrete so he could sleep against the wire next to an old shepherd. He watched it 3 times. Then he went outside and stood in the gravel for a while. Hour 40 and 11 minutes. Bo Crowder, who had driven from the fairgrounds to the kennel at 80 miles an hour and had been stopped at the end of his own driveway by a federal agent and a deputy from a county where his family owned nothing, took out his phone and called the number he had for Grant Ivey, which was a stateside relay number that Grant had given the school 2 years earlier and that rolled to a voicemail box. The message is 31 seconds long. It is the only piece of evidence in the entire case that the jury asked to hear twice. It starts with wind and a car door. Ivey, you listen to me. You listen. There's people all over my property. There's a woman here from the government. They got a warrant. And then his voice changes, and it goes up about half an octave, and it stops being the voice of a man who runs a kingdom, and becomes the voice of a man standing in gravel in the dark, realizing he does not know what is happening, or who is doing it, or how far it goes. Who are you people? And that is the end of the recording, because at that moment a hand belonging to Special Agent Ruben Sandoval of the United States Department of Agriculture Office of Inspector General took the phone out of Bo Crowder's hand and placed it in an evidence bag, and Bo Crowder never finished that sentence, then or afterward, in any room, under oath or otherwise. Grant Ivey found out it was over at 4:40 in the morning local time, standing outside the same tent, and what he did was sit down on an ammo can and put his hands on his knees and stay there for about 10 minutes without moving, and a young specialist walked past him twice and did not say anything, and that is the closest Grant Ivey ever came to falling apart. Then he went and asked his commander for compassionate reassignment, and Lieutenant Colonel Wanda Strick, who had already read the Red Cross message and the Assistant U.S. Attorney's letter, had the paperwork on her desk before he finished the sentence. He was on a rotator 4 days later. He was in a hospital corridor in Marston, Tennessee, 6 days after that. Dr. Francis Adeyemi's report ran to 14 pages. Ezra Ivey weighed 38 pounds, down from 46 at his last well-child visit in April. He had heat rash across his back and shoulders in a pattern consistent with prolonged exposure. He had 11 insect bites in various stages of healing on his arms and neck. He had abrasions on both hips and the outside of both knees, consistent with sleeping on concrete or a hard molded surface without adequate padding. He had no fractures. He had no bruises. There was not one single mark on that boy that a defense attorney could point at and call an assault, which was, Dr. Adeyemi wrote, in a sentence that got read aloud in a federal courtroom 11 months later, entirely consistent with the mechanism described. The child was not injured. The child was stored. Loretta Crowder talked at hour 51, in a room by herself, exactly as Grant had said she would, and she started with the phone call on the 14th of August, exactly where Grant had said to start. She was not defiant. She was 71 years old and had never been in an interview room in her life, and had spent 26 years being the only person in that family who knew where every dollar came from, and once she started she could not stop, because bookkeepers are made of a substance that hates an unbalanced column. She gave them the out book. She gave them Merle Bassinger's cell number, which was in her own address book under M. Bass Thurs. She gave them the cigar box, with the dead veterinarian's signature stamp in it. She gave them the arrangement with the sheriff's K-9 program, which had been invoiced to the county as donated training services, while simultaneously being expensed on the kennel's own taxes as a charitable contribution, which is a neat trick that only works if nobody ever puts the two pieces of paper beside each other. And she gave them Charlene Dupree. Charlene Dupree, notary public, 58, who had stamped documents for the Crowder family for 11 years, and who had, on the 6th of August, stamped and journaled a special power of attorney and a family care plan bearing the signature of a man who was at that moment 7,000 miles away. Notaries in Tennessee keep a journal. It is required. Charlene Dupree's journal, seized from the second drawer of her desk at Curran Farmers Bank, showed an entry for the 6th of August with Grant Ivey's name in it, and, in the column headed Identification Presented, the words personally known. That single phrase, personally known, written by a woman who had never met Grant Ivey in her life, about a day on which he was on a different continent, is what converted a family squabble over a child into 18 counts of federal document fraud, because the powers of attorney in question were executed on a military installation under a federal legal assistance program, and the allotment they were used to redirect came out of the Defense Finance and Accounting Service. Charlene Dupree cried for 40 minutes and then flipped on everybody, and her testimony was the spine of the case. Merle Bassinger was arrested in a truck stop parking lot outside Paducah, Kentucky, 11 days later, with 14 dogs in a trailer and a folder of health certificates signed by a retired man in Florida. 211 forged certificates, a lapsed Class B license. 141 animals moved out of the Crowder property in 14 months for cash. They found 31 of those dogs. Some of them were alive. Sheriff Buddy Lattimore was not arrested for a long time, and when it happened it was quiet and it was for money, not for the boy. $19,000 a year in no-bid canine services, 4 vehicles bought at county auction below assessed value, and a fabricated traffic stop that a deputy named Corey Aldis gave up in about 11 minutes once he understood that his sergeant's version and the dash camera's version were different documents. Bonnie Ivey's charges were dismissed with prejudice on the 4th of November. The state board closed her file. Her employer reinstated her with back pay after Yolanda Pruitt sent them a letter with a federal case number in it. She still does not drive Route 9 at night. Grant Ivey went to the Crowder property once, in October, with Sandoval, because the government needed him to walk the runs and explain what the cards meant. He stood in front of Run 58 for a while. He read the laminated card on the gate, which was still there, because it was evidence and nobody had touched it. It had a species line, and a weight line, and a feed line, and a name line, and in the name line, in Bo Crowder's handwriting, it said boy. Sandoval said, "You okay?" And Grant said, "I'm going to want a copy of this card." That was the entire conversation, and it was, in retrospect, a threat, although nobody understood that at the time. The trials took 14 months. Bo Crowder went first, in federal court, on conspiracy to commit wire fraud, false statements, animal welfare violations, and the transport of animals under falsified certificates, and then in state court on especially aggravated kidnapping, aggravated child neglect, and aggravated child endangerment. His attorney's entire theory was the gate. He said it 11 times. The gate was never locked. He said the boy could have walked into that house any hour of any night. The prosecution answered with 38 seconds of DVR footage from the 11th night, in which Bo Crowder walks down the North Row at 10:50 p.m. with a flashlight, stops at Run 58, and says something the microphone does not pick up. The jury did not need the audio. What they needed was what happened next, which is that the boy, who had been sitting up, lay down and turned his face to the wall. That is what a locked gate looks like when there is no lock. Bo Crowder received 291 months in the state case to run consecutive to 106 months federal. He will be 71 when the second one ends. Elwood Crowder, 74, took a plea on the federal counts and got 131 months, and stood up in court and said he had built something in that county, and had employed people in that county, and had never in his life hurt a child, and the judge, a woman named Odessa Trimble, who had spent 9 years on the bench in the Middle District, said one line back to him that got printed in 3 newspapers. "Mr. Crowder, you built a business that was paid to count, and you sold the county a number every single day for 26 years. You did not hurt a child. You built the room where nobody had to." Denton Crowder got 41 months. Loretta Crowder got 18 months and a cooperation letter. Charlene Dupree got probation and lost her commission and her job. Buddy Lattimore got 71 months and is the only one of them who still says publicly that he did nothing wrong. Merle Bassinger got 188 months, which is the longest sentence ever handed down in that district under the Animal Welfare Act. And the assistant U.S. attorney who got it, Dov Kirkbride, keeps a photograph of a shepherd mix with a bad hip on the wall of his office. The restitution order in the federal case ran to 206 pages. Curran County got most of it, on paper. In practice, what the county got was 11 acres. Crowder Kennels and Canine Services was forfeited and went to auction on a Thursday in March, on the courthouse steps in Bel Harrow, in a light rain, with about 40 people standing around, most of whom were there to watch rather than to bid. Grant Ivey bought it for $281,000, which was almost exactly what was left of Marley's settlement, after the trust was reconstituted and the fees were paid and the court signed off on the purchase as an investment on behalf of the minor, which took Yolanda Pruitt 4 months and a hearing to accomplish. He bulldozed the North Row, all 19 runs, the concrete pads, the corrugated roof, the whole thing, in one afternoon, and he did it himself on a rented machine, and Ezra sat on the tailgate of the truck and watched. He kept the South Row. He rebuilt it, and the place is now called Sargent's, and it is a retirement and rehabilitation kennel for working dogs, police dogs and military dogs who are done, and who mostly have hips and shoulders and heads that need a soft year. And it operates as a non-profit with a board and an audit and, on the wall of the front office, framed under glass where every visitor sees it, a laminated run card with the word boy on it. The old shepherd mix was the first resident. He was not a working dog and he never had been, and Grant put him on the sign anyway. Sargent lived 2 more years and died in November, on a dog bed in a heated office with a 7-year-old, then a 9-year-old, asleep next to him on the floor. Piper Crowder testified for 3 hours in the federal trial and 2 in the state one, against her father, her uncle, her grandfather, and her grandmother, and her family has not spoken to her since. She was 17 when she finished. Grant Ivey paid for her first 2 years of veterinary technician school out of his own pocket and did not tell anyone, and when a reporter eventually found out and asked him about it, he said, "She's the one who did it." Everybody else got asked. She volunteered, and then he refused to answer anything else. She manages the kennel now. And there is one more thing, which is the part people always ask about. At Bo Crowder's state sentencing, the court invited a victim impact statement, and Grant Ivey walked up to the lectern with a single sheet of paper, and everybody in that room, the reporters especially, leaned forward, because a decorated warrant officer whose son had been kept in a dog run for 19 nights was about to say something. He did not say anything. He read. He had made a run card, the same laminated format, the same fields, the same layout that hangs on every gate in every kennel in America, and he read it into the record, in a flat administrative voice, like a man reading a shipping manifest. Run 58, occupant, Ezra Del Ivey, male, 7 years. Date in, August 13th. Date out, August 29th. Nights, 19. Intake weight, 46 pounds. Outtake weight, 38 pounds. Shelter, molded plastic, no bedding. Water, 1 bucket, refilled by occupant. Feed, 1 meal daily, paper plate, delivered by hand. Exercise, none recorded. Veterinary, none. Behavior notes, subject did not vocalize. Subject did not attempt escape. Subject counted vehicles. Then he put the card down and looked at his brother-in-law for the first time in 14 months and said the only sentence he addressed to him in the entire proceeding. "Bo, you kept a card on every animal on that property for 20 years. I just wanted you to hear one read out loud." And then he sat down. Bo Crowder had been sitting through 14 months of this, the way he had sat through everything in his life, with his chin up and a small patient expression on his face, like a man waiting for other people to finish being unreasonable. The court reporter's transcript notes, in the neutral bracket language they use, that at that point the defendant lowered his head and did not raise it again. Ezra Ivey is 11 now. He is fine, in the way that kids are fine, which is not all the way and not never. He does not sleep with the door closed. He is very good with animals and slightly cautious with adults, and he has an aunt who takes him to every appointment and a cousin who is teaching him to draw blood from a very patient beagle. He still counts. He cannot not count. And every August, on the 28th, Grant Ivey takes the day off and the two of them drive to the coast and stand on a pier and do absolutely nothing. And Grant has never once asked him about Run 58, and Ezra has never once brought it up, And the closest they have come was about a year ago when the boy said, out of nowhere, looking at the water, "You said stay quiet." And Grant said, "I did." And Ezra said, "How'd you know I'd know what you meant?" And his father said, "Because I never once talked to you like you were a kid." That's the story. I want to leave you with 3 things, because I've been sitting with this one for a while, and it won't quite let go of me. The first is about that phone call, and about what stay quiet actually was. We are trained by about 1,000 movies to believe that the correct response to your child being hurt is volume. Scream at somebody. Get on a plane. Kick a door. And I understand it. It feels like love. It feels like doing something. But Grant Ivey understood that in that specific moment, with 7,000 miles and a classification and a forged notary stamp between him and his son, noise was the one thing that would have gotten Ezra moved, gotten the book burned, and gotten every single one of those people a pass. He didn't stay calm because he wasn't angry. He stayed calm because anger was the only thing in the room he could actually afford to lose. The second is the thing that genuinely scares me about this story, and it's not Bo, it's the invoice. A county paid a private business, per animal, per day, for 26 years, and never once sent a human being to walk down the row and count the animals. That's it. That's the whole crime. Everything else, the dogs in the Thursday trailer, the dead veterinarian's signature, the boy in Run 58, all of it grew in the space where a number was accepted instead of checked. If you take one practical thing from this, any system that pays on a self-reported count and never verifies will eventually be used for something nobody designed it for. That is not cynicism, that's just arithmetic. And the third is about the run card, because it's my favorite thing anybody's ever done in one of these stories. Grant Ivey could have said anything at that sentencing. Instead, he took the exact instrument that family used to turn living things into inventory, and he filled it out with his son's name, and he read it out loud in a room full of strangers, in that flat voice. He didn't call Bo a monster. He just showed him his own handwriting. There's a lesson in that about how you actually beat people like this, and it isn't a satisfying one, and it's true anyway. You don't beat them by being louder. You beat them by being the one who kept the record. Take care of each other. I'll see you in the next one.